For more than 5 years, it was a mystery, an unsolved case with many leads, suspicious characters, and so many rumors. Investigators released very limited information, but journalists, podcasters, and true crime followers all speculated on what happened to best friends Abby Williams and Libby German, two teenage girls living in the small rural community of Delphi, Indiana, a town with under 3,000 residents. On February 13th, 2017, the girls had a day off from school, and they decided to go on an outdoor adventure. They were dropped off near the Monon High Bridge, and that's where their bodies were found the next day. More than 5 years later, Richard Allen was arrested for the murders, but he is claiming his innocence, and the defense has their own theory of the case. A group of white nationalists who practiced the ancient Nordic religion of odinism murdered the girls in a ritualistic killing. They also claim that the reach of these local odinists goes all the way to the prison where he was being held. But at his trial, Richard Allen was prohibited from using any evidence connected to odinism. And now, all the evidence is in, all the arguments have been made, and it's time to hear from the jury. And we are live from Indiana with all the latest in the Delphi Murders Trial. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. Believe it or not, we're getting to the end of the Delphi Murders Trial out in Indiana. As you know, cameras have been banned by the judge, so we don't get to see or hear any of the evidence, but we are covering it for you here on this program each and every night with our great in-depth coverage and insiders who are inside that courtroom. You know, when you think about this case, you think about this story, it's an incredibly tragic loss because you're talking about two young girls, best friends, living their best innocent lives in a small town in Indiana. Everything should be great. Everything should be great. You know, on that day, they were off from school and, you know, they decided to go do something together. Rather than sit around, play video games or goof around on social media or do anything like that, they were going outside. And they were actually going to walk over this really dangerous bridge, the Monon High Bridge. And I guess it's sort of a rite of passage. I think all the folks from that area at one point or another try to see if they could walk over that bridge. You're looking at it right here. I mean, no rails on the side. It's the wood slats, a little rickety, but they did it. Like they made it over the bridge, and then there were some trails near the woods that you could walk around. And there were other people out that day because it was a little bit warm for February in Indiana. It was like in the 50s, which is actually a really nice day in the dead of winter. And they were having an innocent, good time, but they made it over the dangerous bridge. And the question is, the man they ran into that day, was he more dangerous than the bridge? And prosecutors say it's this man, Richard Allen. I mean, they absolutely ran into somebody on that bridge, referred to as the bridge guy. Prosecutors say Richard Allen is the bridge guy. But was Richard Allen, who admits that he was there that day, was he more dangerous than the bridge? Or has he been put out as the scapegoat in all of this? That's what this trial is about, and we're waiting to find out what will the jury say? What are they going to say about this? Because they have the case. The jury has the case. So let's get to our insiders. Joining me tonight, Court TV senior producer Barbara McDonald and criminal defense attorney, host of the Defense Diaries podcast, Bob Motta, both in Indiana, both on this story for a long, long time, and both inside the courtroom for this trial to see and hear the evidence that we can't see and hear. Literally, our eyes and ears in the courtroom. Thank you both for being here. All right, Barbara, let's begin. What is the latest from deliberations, because the jury has the case now?
They do have the case, and they deliberated about 2 hours this afternoon and then called it a day. They are sequestered, so they didn't get to go home. They went back to their hotel. about a half an hour probably away from the courthouse. They'll begin again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. They were told to begin their deliberations with selecting a foreperson. We imagine that they did that. And then they discussed the case for 2 hours and said, all right, that's enough for today. We'll come back tomorrow. The judge said that they can go until 4 p.m. each day unless they request to go longer. They chose to go shorter today, Vinny.
And are they sequestered?
They are fully sequestered, so they don't have access to the internet. They are allowed to have their phones or laptops in the evening with bailiff supervision while they check in with their family and loved ones and check work emails, that sort of thing, but they are not allowed to keep those devices. They have no radios, no televisions, no internet. They can't talk about the case with anybody else, and they cannot deliberate when they're at the hotel. They can only deliberate at the courthouse.
Bill, this is very unusual. Usually you have a jury that is sequestered. You know, the deliberations and the days go longer, and they keep them. I know they've been working Saturdays. So, Barbara, how long was this trial?
It was 17 days of testimony, 18 days, including today with closing arguments.
Okay, 17 days of testimony. I have a little theorem, Bob Mata, for what an average deliberation time is. And I base it on weeks or days here. You know, 17 days of testimony. That's like three weeks, 3 and change. I'm thinking until we get past 17 hours of deliberations, we don't have a long deliberation in a case like this. So they did 2 today. You know, if they don't get a verdict tomorrow, they don't get a verdict Monday, I think around Tuesday things start getting on the longer side. But what are your thoughts as you sit here tonight, having eyeballed this jury and seeing that, hey, a sequestered jury decided to go home early today?
Yeah, that took me by surprise, you know, because one of the things that lawyers that actually do trial work hate most is when a jury goes in on a Friday, in terms of, especially if they heard closings and then they get the instructions and then they end up going in at like 1 o'clock on a Friday. That's the dreaded time to have them start, because if it's been a long trial, you always have that fear that they're going to get a compromised verdict because they're done. They're over it. They want to get out there. They don't want to have to either come back or deliberate on a weekend. So I was excited that this thing was getting done on a Thursday. I was like, well, they're only going to have like four hours to, you know, really kind of get into it. But I mean, it's a good start. So when they called and said, look, we're good for the day, you know, like obviously I'm thinking, okay, it's one of two things. It's one, either they've come to an agreement very quickly, and they're like, you know what, let's sleep on it. You know, we're all in agreement. Let's make sure, let's sleep on it. Plus, we don't want to make it look like we didn't really deliberate. So, you know, we'll sleep on it and then we'll come back. And if they come back pretty quickly tomorrow, we'll know that that's the case, that they actually were already in agreement on what was going on. Or it may have gotten heated. And, you know, and they're like, you know what, let's take a break. Let's take a breath. Let's come back tomorrow.
Hungry.
So.
Or hungry. I don't know if they feed them there, if they're going to feed them dinner at the courthouse.
Feed them.
Okay.
They feed them.
All right. Maybe they want to keep them. I don't know. This judge, no cameras. Maybe it's no food. Maybe it's just bread and water for the jury. I don't know. All right. Let's talk about the closing arguments. Start with you, Barbara. What about the state's closing argument today?
The state took about an hour for their first part of their closing argument, and then only 7 minutes for their rebuttal closing argument. That's Nicholas McClelland right there from the press conference announcing Richard Allen's arrest. And he delivered that closing argument. He talked about the 3 facets of the case for him: the bridge guy, the bullet, and the brutal murder, and says that all of the witnesses that were at the trails that day testified that they saw the guy in Libby's video, that he feels confident that all of that evidence proves that Richard Allen is in fact Bridge Guy, and that Bridge Guy committed these murders.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second, Barbara. I hate to do this, but I just want to make it clear, because we're not getting to see or hear any of this. Was there any witness who saw Bridge Guy who in the courtroom pointed at Richard Allen and said, yeah, that's the Bridge Guy right there?
No, the only witnesses who did that were law enforcement people who talked about talking to Richard Allen, like Dan Doolin, the DNR guy who first took that tip from him back in 2017. He identified Richard Allen in the courtroom, but none of the witnesses from the trail, those teen girls, Betsy Blair or Sarah Carbaugh, who supposedly saw a muddy and bloody man walking back to his car. None of them were asked if they saw the person that they saw that day in the courtroom, and so none of them pointed him out.
So how do they say they proved that Richard Allen is the bridge guy? Was it his own statement saying, I walked across the bridge that day?
Yeah, and that basically his statements sort of line up with what the witnesses say, that he said he saw several teen girls, and there were 3 teen girls who saw Bridge Guy, that when he got out to the bridge, that he walked out onto the first platform and stood there looking at the fish in the creek below, and that he maybe saw somebody when he was on that platform. That lines up with Betsy Blair, who says she walked to the bridge, saw Bridge Guy on the platform, but she also described him as being younger, youthful in appearance, with poofy hair. So it's up to the jury whether or not they believe that the man that Betsy Blair saw was in fact Richard Allen. The state seems confident, but will the jury be confident?
Right. And how do they connect that Bridge Guy is the one who committed the actual murder?
That was something they just said, that there was nobody else there, that the video shows one man, and that they believe Richard Allen did this acting alone. The defense, of course, has pointed out throughout this trial that multiple people in law enforcement thought there could be multiple killers involved, that there was more than one murder weapon used, that the scene would have taken one person just too much time, and so therefore it makes sense that more people were involved. The former sheriff Tobe Lesenby even testified that that was his belief.
Wow. All right, Bob Mata, watching the state's closing argument and listening to it, what are your thoughts about because Richard Allen needs to be Bridge Guy needs to be the murderer. Did they close the gaps on all of that?
It's hard to know. I mean, there was nothing novel about the closing. I mean, it was essentially the same thing that he said in the opening. Like, he didn't really focus on the evidence all that much in terms of, I mean, we have the round. It's unequivocal in the mind of the state that is the nexus between Allen and that crime scene, right? So, he touched on it. The
unspent round that cycled through his gun but wasn't fired, based upon their experts' analysis, that the markings on that are the same as the markings on a round that was fired from the gun.
Correct. And I mean, he talked about it a bit, but, considering that was their strongest piece of evidence, I found it, he kind of just glazed over it. But part of that is due to the fact that Oberg, the expert who testified, really didn't give an explanation to the jury as to why it was a sufficient agreement, which is, like that type of terminology used in that field for a match. All right, they're not allowed to say a match. They have to say there was sufficient agreement. So, there's this concept that you have to show your work. But in terms of, he really tried to build his argument around the timeline, and that, look, we know Allen was out here. We know these people saw him out here. He has to be Bridge Guy because no one else saw another guy out there.
Wow.
It's process of elimination. He has to be the guy because no other witness talked about any other guy. So I mean, and that was basically it.
Process of elimination, right? It had to be him. There's nobody else there. That's what they're saying. Nobody else there. All right, Barbara, let's talk about the defense closing argument. How was that?
The defense talked about the evidence and said that the state did not give you the full story about what happened out there, and that they had to fill in the gaps by calling other witnesses who were on the trails that day, who didn't see a man, but also didn't hear any screams or any commotion coming from the crime scene. We heard from searchers who were at the crime scene that you could hear people on the bridge. So they sort of made the analogy that if people from the crime scene could hear the bridge, people on the bridge should have been able to hear the crime scene. Nobody heard anything, even though there were multiple people who even walked across the bridge during the time the state believes these murders happened. And they also talked about Richard Allen's treatment behind bars and those false confessions, as they called them, and said that his treatment was essentially torture. They Bradley Rosie showed some images of medieval torture devices, and then showed a slideshow of images of Richard Allen behind bars. Just really difficult images to see, him lying naked on the floor of his cell, him covered with a hood over his head, other images of him strapped down, and then finally put up an image of a python wrapped around its prey and said, in this story, that python is the state.
Interesting. So they're playing, Bob, they're playing Richard Allen as a victim here. But we have, so, you know, you can say emotions have nothing to do with verdicts and shouldn't have anything to do with verdicts, but it's a reality. Everyone's a human being. Every juror, everyone in that courtroom, and you've got two innocent young girls who were brutally killed, and it was unconscionable what happened to these two girls. Their families are I presume, very obvious in the courtroom. And I've got to think that a jury's going to want justice for the family. They won't want to let the family down. That if there's the evidence is there, they're going to try to get them some sense of justice. So balance that, Bob, versus the defense's attempt to garner sympathy for Richard Allen.
Yeah, and it's a dangerous gambit. And like during the course of the trial, you know, there was a question that was posed wherein they were saying, are you trying to ask, McClelland asked, and I can't remember what witness is, he says, are you trying to say that Richard Allen is the victim? And I think it may have been Westcott, who was their forensic psychologist that they had on. And she said, no, you know, because it's exactly what you're saying. I mean, look, if it turned out that Richard Allen is not the culprit, then certainly he's been victimized, you know, in a very different way than obviously the girls, right? So, but as the defense, I think that we were really trying to paint the picture as the defense was like, look, we cannot take American citizens, no matter what we think that they might have done, and we cannot treat them like this. This is not what we signed up for as a country. This is not who we are. And you know, he, like, at the end of it, he said, look, like, this is not the time to take a step back. And he's talking to the jury. He says, this is the time for you to step in the ring. This is the time for you to say no to the government. We're not going to allow you to treat us citizens like this, no matter what you think that we did. We did, you know, constitutionally, we were owed a fair trial and due process under the law. You're not allowed to torture us to extract confessions. So it was, I mean, it was effective, but that wasn't all of it. That was probably the last 5 minutes was really kind of focused on that. The rest of it was picking apart the state's case, and really the focus mostly was on what the state didn't show you being the jurors. Why didn't they show you this? Why did we have to put it on in our case in chief, or why did we have to pull it out of their witnesses on cross-examination? These facts. That's what you have to ask yourself. Why? Why were they hiding this information? And that was like a bulk of the closing. It was effective. It was effective. But at the end of the day, who knows what a jury is going to do, Vinny?
No,
you just don't know.
I never know what a jury's going to do. Whether I watch them every day or don't watch them every day, you don't know what the dynamic is. But I do know that there is a sense for jurors that they want to find justice for the victim's family and for the victims when the victims are like this, two innocent young girls brutally murdered who should be alive, should be enjoying their lives. Their families should be watching them grow up. And sometimes that's difficult to overcome if there is arguably enough evidence to convict. So that'll be fascinating to see them how they balance that and how they handle that. Let me ask you, Barbara, about the families in the courtroom. What did you notice?
The families were there in full force today, both for the victims, Abby and Libby, as well as Richard Allen's family were there all in full force. I noticed that prior to the day beginning, most people had gathered in the courtroom about 30 to 45 minutes before court actually began this morning. And at one point I heard sobbing, and I looked over, and it was Abby's mother, who was just crying uncontrollably. She was being comforted by her own mother, as well as some of the members of Libby's family. You could just feel the emotion. They have waited almost 8 years for justice. They believe that Richard Allen is the guy. They have confidence in this investigation. And I think they're ready for this to be over. Not that it necessarily brings closure for them, but they can move on to the next phase of the grieving process without having the question of who did it, where are they, and when are they going to be brought to justice, provided there is a guilty verdict here.
That's so true. They never get closure, but you get a sense of justice, which is the only thing you can have, and you get to, like, turn the page, go to the next chapter of whatever's going on, but you never, ever, ever forget. Barbara McDonald, Bob Motta, I know will be speaking on Friday, which is oftentimes a verdict day. So thank you so much for your great reporting, great insight and analysis of what's happening there. Okay, when we come back, we'll bring in our think tank. We'll dive into some of the evidence and some of the issues in the Delphi murder case with our think tank, plus coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, Maya Millette disappeared on January 7th, 2021. Her body has never been found, but her husband has been charged with her murder. While we wait for the trial, everyone is still looking for an answer to the most important question: where is Maya?
Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, tonight, 9/8 Central, only on Court TV.
What happened that night?
Killed my wife. I don't remember none of that.
If you were me, would you believe you?
Interview with a Killer, Sunday, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Let's never forget this case went unsolved for 5 years, the Delphi murders. Then the arrest of Richard Allen took place, and prosecutors said they wrapped it all up. He did it by himself. There was no one else involved. Richard Allen says he's innocent, pointing the finger in other directions. But during the course of this trial, more evidence has come out. We've had testimony from witnesses, and now we have a much better timeline of what witnesses say they saw and where Richard Allen was and where Abby and Libby were. So I want to go through that right now. This is sort of a timeline map that we've put together to try to understand what was going on that day. And we begin at 1:26 p.m. Bree Wilbur is sitting on a bench near Mears Gate entrance to the trails when she sees Bridge Guy. Okay, so she sees Bridge Guy. Bridge Guy, that's the video we've been seeing all the time. There he is. 1:43 is when Libby's sister Kelsey drops Abby and Libby off across from Mears Farm. So now they're dropped off by Mears Farm, and you know, before that you see the Bridge Guy near the entrance of the trails. 2 o'clock, another witness, her name is Betsy Blair. She sees Bridge Guy on the first platform of the Monon High Bridge and said that he seemed to be looking for someone. Okay, so 2 o'clock, there he is, first platform of the Monon High Bridge. And again, when they identify this guy, it's the guy from the video. It's the guy from the video that the witnesses are identifying. 2 o'clock, Betsy Blair is walking away from the Monon High Bridge as she passes Abby and Libby, who are walking towards the bridge. which is interesting, right? So Betsy Blair's walking in the opposite direction, first sees the bridge guy, then sees Abby and Libby, which tells me that Abby and Libby are going to be walking past the bridge guy. Because at 2:13, the bridge guy is captured on video on Libby's phone in the background, as if they've walked past him. So at that point, 2:13, Libby and Abby have gone past this bridge guy. So the bridge guy is going to now, standing there, whatever he's looking for, sees two young girls by themselves. 2:32 is when Libby's phone stops moving, and prosecutors made a big deal about this. They believe this is the time that the murders are taking place. We get to another important time and another important witness. 3:56, Sarah Carbaugh is driving past the Hoosier Harvest Store on CR 300 North when she sees a muddy, bloody man walking west on the north side of 300 North, away from the Monon High Bridge. So I think through this timeline and the map, you can kind of see the movements of everyone connected to what happened here. And you see the connection, and you see the way prosecutors are putting the bridge guy right next to and in the vicinity of Abby and Libby based upon this eyewitness testimony. Let's bring in our think tank, see what they have to say about all this tonight. Joining us tonight, criminal defense attorney Eklund Mercy. Also with us, retired criminal defense attorney Kirk Nurmi, and former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani. Welcome, everyone. So how effective is all of this, putting all of this together, where the eyewitnesses are seeing the bridge guy in the vicinity in the same time that they're seeing Abby and Libby? Eklund, I think this is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't help the prosecution much, because it's the next question I'm going to ask is, what did you do after you saw a bloody, muddy man? Did you call the authorities?
No, she didn't contact anyone until like 3 weeks later.
Yeah, and that's my problem there. And then we have the bridge guy. The issue is that the defendant here has a very distinct facial feature. Like, he has a very distinct beard, and regardless if you're muddy or bloody or what have you.
We have to be honest here, Eklund. However he looks in this photo is 5 years after the double murder. This thing wasn't solved overnight. Should have been solved overnight if they believe Richard Allen is the one, because a couple days after it happened, he called in and said, I was there, but for whatever reason, there was no follow-up and they cleared him. So, I mean, beards can grow. Like,
yeah, and
like Nima's beard is always the same. I don't know what that is. I don't know. I don't know how he does that. I don't know if it's a filter on the camera or something, but it's always perfect. But other people's, their beards grow and shrink.
But well, as distinct his beard is, it just seems that if somebody were to describe him, one of the first things even with remembering this case, I was like, oh, the beard case. So that's a very distinct feature. That's a very distinct thing. If I could see blood and mud, then I could see beard. So I think that's going to be an issue. And then the question of the phone, why were you recording at that time? Like, what were you doing at that time? So unless they set proper foundations to really confirm the veracity or the, just how sure the witnesses are, I would need that information.
Kirk Nurmi, let's get right to what Eklund's talking about, because Betsy Blair described the bridge guy. And they had an artist draw a picture that looks like Justin Timberlake. What are your thoughts here? This white male, age 20, brown curly hair, medium build. This is Betsy Blair. This is one of the witnesses who's walking on the bridge and sees the bridge guy, and that's the bridge. That's not Richard Allen.
No, and what we're seeing here, you know, you mentioned in the open there about 5 years to solve this case, and this is one of the reasons probably for that, because we have this correlation. I disagree with Eklund. I think when we have bridge guy and the victims in this case in proximity around the time that her phone stops moving, we certainly have a correlation between the girls and bridge guy. And then if we combine that with the bullet found near the scene that's tied to Mr. Allen, we know that there's further correlation to him. But that's what some of the things that make this not such a tight case, and why it took 5 years, is it gives the defense opening, because it's circumstantial, and bridge guy, as you said, is not Richard Allen. So, and I'm sure we heard the defense probably, well, we didn't get to hear the defense, but the defense probably pointed that out several times, that this guy does not fit the description of Mr. Allen.
Yeah,
so
but unfortunately,
the time frame isn't so tight.
Yeah, the judge didn't allow the sketches in, but only the descriptions by the people who described it to the artist. So Nima, by the way, this next sketch, this beard more closely resembles yours, because this is from the muddy and bloody witness, Sarah Carbaugh. This is what she described when she sat down with the artist, and that looks nothing like number 2, but arguably a little bit closer to Richard Allen. And this was the man who was seen walking on 300 North. What do you think about establishing that Richard Allen is bridge guy and bridge guy is the killer?
Well, that's the only way the defense can really defend this case, say that Allen is neither bridge guy, or he is, but bridge guy didn't kill Abby and Libby. And we've talked a lot about how eyewitness identification is not accurate, but what is accurate is that Snapchat video. And there's a reason that law enforcement released it, and we spent years on this show talking about that video and down the hill and trying to say, is Allen's voice the voice of the person in the video? Is that individual wearing the jeans and the blue jacket, is that Richard Allen? So I would set these sketches aside and I'd focus on the video, because of course the eyewitness testimony may not be the most accurate, but that video doesn't lie.
Yeah, as we put the sketch next to Nima, I was like, if we put one of those little, you know, old-time newsy hats on him, like it could be him. So I just want to do this, Eklund. We have like 30 seconds after I lay this out. But that witness, the muddy and bloody witness you have a problem with, there are some problems. She said there was mud all over, blood spatter on the lower pants only. She contacted police 3 weeks later because she was freaked out by what she saw. The defense points out that Carbaugh said mud 11 times in her first interview with law enforcement, but never said blood. And the defense points out in a second interview, she said mud 13 times, but never said blood, and then got argumentative. So do you think that if she's talking about blood at the trial, but not talking about blood in the first 2 interviews, that that's a big problem?
Absolutely, because of the 3 weeks. Already the testimony is bad because it's been 3 weeks, and then now you want to add the added caveat, which is I had blood one time and blood the second. The word blood is very important, and I think that really kind of discredits that witness.
Yeah.
I think because there's so many things going on.
And really what's happening in here, and the way they're trying this case, is they're saying A equals B, right? B equals C, therefore A equals C. And that's it, if they can get to the A equals C. Because they're saying they saw the bridge guy, then they're saying the bridge guy is in fact Richard Allen, and therefore the killer is Richard Allen. We shall say. Think Tank staying with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about what the jury didn't get to hear about. The odinism. Was it a fair trial without the defense presenting their theory of the case?
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it? Shame on you! Shame on you, Richard!
You had not heard of odinism?
I thought it was hocus pocus. I honestly didn't. I'd never heard of it. And the more I got into it, that's a real thing. It is a real thing, and it's scary. I believe they sacrificed a girl and killed another one.
Odinism is real, but it wasn't a part of the Delphi Murders Trial. It was the defense to the case. It was the defense of the case. There was a faction of the task force that was investigating this when it was still a mystery that believed this was a ritualistic killing by Odinists. Absolutely believed it. None of that testimony permitted by the judge. So what is Odinism? It's a Norse pagan religion hijacked by white nationalists. That's what the defense has said. Take a look, because what I have here is the description of how Abby and Libby were found at the scene. And based upon that description, we put together these images. And what the defense was talking about was the arrangement of the sticks, that it would mean something next to a tree, and some of the markings in blood on the tree together were part of this ritualistic killing of these two young girls. And there were other people involved as suspects that were investigated by that task force, and the defense latched onto that and believed that was a big part of this case. But again, prohibited from bringing any of that testimony. Then the evidence shows, and the defense pointed this out, during his pretrial incarceration at the Westville Correctional Facility, Richard Allen was monitored, intimidated, and mentally abused by correctional officers who were members of the Odinite cult. The Westville Corrections officers boldly wore patches on their DOC uniforms that proclaimed, "In Odin we trust," along with another patch. And when they made this allegation, we're like, are you kidding me? And then the state's response, oh yeah, both Sergeant Blank and Sergeant Blank have worn patches that refer to Odinism. These patches reflect Sergeant Blank's and Sergeant Blank's religious beliefs and are not associated with any kind of a cult. So Odinism is real. The people who are watching him pre-trial when he's doing all these confessions were Odinists, but the jury knows nothing about any of it. Let's bring back our think tank. Eklund Mercy, Kirk Nurmi, and Nima Rahmani with us. Kirk, you know, it's not like the defense grabbed this out of some place and made it up. It was in the discovery. It was part of the task force investigation. Then it was part of what was happening in the correctional facility. How shocked are you that none of this was permitted, and does that make this trial unfair from your perspective in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than shocking, it's downright repulsive. The idea that in America, first of all, we're going to prohibit someone who has a Sixth Amendment right to defend themselves the opportunity to do so. And as you said, it wasn't as if they were just making this up. It's a real situation. It was thought of as a theory by investigators. You know that it's in some of the discovery. So this idea that the judge cut off somebody's Sixth Amendment rights is repulsive. I mean, obviously she's maybe not a fan of the First Amendment. And also when we talk about the denial of Sixth Amendment rights, we cannot forget that the torturous environment that you were talking about in the earlier segment with Bob Mata, about the hood over the head, the pictures that Barbara mentioned, things of that nature. Getting a confession of that nature is something that we've rejected under the Eighth Amendment. So I think there's going to be a lot of problems with the trial, and it does begin with the Odinism and the denial of that defense.
Nima, former federal prosecutor, was this fair?
It wasn't, Vinny, and I've been on court TV many times, and I've said that I think Richard Allen has a much better chance on appeal than he does at this trial. I do not think the jurors are going to return a not guilty verdict. I don't think they're going to hang either, but the defense should be able to present their alternate theory of the case. It could be weird, it could be bonkers, it could be conspiracy theory, it doesn't matter. If you're a prosecutor, argue the case straight up. Don't cut out the defense's legs from under them. Let them point to someone else. And I think this does explain, I don't agree with it, why the defense thinks the 60 admissions or confessions were coerced by the prison guards. So let them argue their case. I think the trial judge made a mistake here. We may have to retry this case all over as a result.
Yeah, Eklund, I was shocked when none of this became part of the case. We have about 25 seconds left here. Does this now make this an unfair case and set up Richard Allen for a potential appeal wherever it goes?
I'm not shocked because, just based off of the town and how small it is, and just if you have officers who are actively participating in it, so it's not shocking. But I do believe that it's just not. The prosecution has the statute of limitation is. There is no statute of limitation on murder. And for you to expect the jury to do your case for you, that's the problem.
Yeah.
I think that's the shock.
Yeah, I think if you have the evidence as a prosecutor, it doesn't matter what the other side has. You have the evidence, you just prove it. Anyway, Eklund Mercy, Kirk Dermy, Nima Romani, thank you so much. Great to see you all. When we come back, I'll reveal something else you need to know tonight.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, coming up next, only on Court TV.
What happened that night?
Killed my wife. I don't remember none of that.
If you were me, would you believe you?
Interview with a Killer, Sunday, 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Welcome back. Time to reveal something else you need to know tonight. Let's take a look at the big board. And there we have a death penalty suit for the accused Idaho student's killer. The judge ruled that he will be able to wear civilian clothes for all pre-trial hearings in his death penalty case, and obviously will be able to wear it in front of the jury. In the meantime, his defense attorney's trying to get the death penalty taken off the table in this case. Let's take a listen.
I think you can consider what Judge Boyce did in the Vallow case.
That was as a result of the state having failed to provide the information, violating its court order.
We don't think it's appropriate to force somebody to choose between competing constitutional rights. Lori Vallow had not ever waived speedy trial, and so she had the choice to waive speedy or not face the death penalty. And we think that since we were forced to choose between rights, those should be reinstated and the court should strike the death penalty.
Judge will make a decision soon. And now to California for another something else you need to know tonight. Jurors have decided the fate of the defendant in the Killed in the Crosswalk murder trial. Prosecutors say Brandon Janik ran a red light and killed a 47-year-old named Joshua Gilliand as he was walking across the street. He's charged with second-degree murder, gross vehicular manslaughter, felony hit and run, and felony DUI. Gilliland was on his way to work at Cheers, a bar where he had worked for more than 20 years when he was killed. Witnesses say several people stopped to help the victim, but Brandon Janik did not, and he's now been found guilty on all counts, including murder. He wiped away tears as the verdict was read.
In the Superior Court of the State of California, and for the County of San Diego, Central Division, the people of the State of California plaintiff versus Brandon A. Janik defendant, case number SCD 300413. Verdict count 1, second-degree murder. We, the jury, in the above entitled cause, find the defendant, Brandon A. Janik, guilty of the crime of second-degree murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, as charged in count 1 of the information, dated November 7, 2024, signed by juror foreperson number 4.
Janik faces 15 years to life behind bars plus an additional 8 years for insurance fraud charges. He's going to be sentenced next month. Now, please take a look at your television screens. We have a missing child who needs your help. This is Trinity Grace Hudson, missing from Union City, Georgia, since October 22nd, 17 years old. If you see Trinity, pick up the phone, make a call, make a difference. 911, 1-800-THE-LOST, or the Union City Police Department in Georgia. That phone number's on your screen right now. Don't go anywhere. We've got another hour of live true crime. Vinnie Politan Investigates is next. In the meantime, please don't forget to hug the kids.